Welcome to the Expert Series, where we explore the issues shaping Canadian national security and defense. I'm Angelina Smolinek, a research assistant for the CDA Institute, and I'm joined today by 4 experts to discuss Canada's role in Ukrainian security. On the podcast today are Julia Soldatiuk-Westerveld, Senior Research Fellow at the Klingendahl Institute, Justin Massie, Head of the Department of Political Science at the Université du Québec à Montréal, Olena Snigyr, Senior Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and Colonel Michel Drapeau, a law professor at the University of Ottawa and a retired colonel with over 30 years in the Canadian military. Canada has long been a steadfast ally to Ukraine, from launching Operation Unifier in 2015, which is the Canadian Armed Forces military training, professionalization, and capacity building mission, to providing $4.5 billion in military assistance since the beginning of 2022. There is no doubt that Canada is invested in both the sovereignty and peace of Ukraine. But how far does that support go? In this episode, we cover Canada's participation in the Coalition of the Willing, the need to boost defense in Europe, and how Russian delays for a ceasefire in Ukraine send signals to both allies and adversaries on changes to the international order. This is the Expert Series. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today. I would like to situate ourselves a bit first and discuss what we've seen happening in Europe over the last few months, specifically the creation of the Coalition of the Willing and the Rearm Europe plan, as well as what Canada's role has been so far in supporting Ukrainian and European security. So who would like to start us off to maybe give us a lay of the land in Europe and in Canada?
What we have been witnessing or seeing is a change in the attitude of the new American U.S. administration when it comes with regard to the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, in their attempt to negotiate a quick ceasefire. That has led to a mobilized attitude with European member states, some of the European member states, to reconsider or to think about the own security or the role of the European security within the NATO transatlantic alliance, but also in how to what could be the future of Ukraine look like in terms of security guarantees. So that has prompted a new kind of wave of cooperation, and regardless of the steps in the next process, whether the ceasefire would be realistic in the short term, that's a kind of a new tendency that we see that will probably continue for the coming time. The discussions, at least within among the European member states and countries outside the EU, on reshaping the security framework.
And I would add that what we're all waiting for is the results of these ongoing negotiations between Russia and the United States, because the proposal of some European states to secure a ceasefire all hinge upon the sort of deal that could be made between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And what we're seeing is the Russian president dragging on these negotiations, imposing conditions, saying yes, but, and then basically not committing to the full ceasefire that was requested by President Trump, that was agreed upon by President Zelensky. And we see that the Russian government is not hoping for peace in the short term, at least. They're trying to achieve, through diplomatic negotiations, the war aims, the same war aims they had since December 2021, but through negotiations rather than on the battlefield. So we're all waiting for these ongoing negotiations are still planned in the coming days, whether it's going to be dragged on for weeks and months, and will at one point, will President Trump's patience end? And how will the U.S. government react if it believes that the Russians do not want short-term peace?
We're engaging to a no-return position. We've been there before. We've been there before in the Second World War, when Europe and Canada engaged in war, 1939. It took a little while before Germany came in, and before the United States came in, and we didn't have to wait for them to engage. I think politically, the thing that I'm particularly pleased about, politically, there seemed to be a sort of unison between all European countries and Canada that we need to take action. We will take action. The delay that is taking place now is not surprising. I mean, Putin will delay as much as he can, and meanwhile, he's still engaging combat. He's still advancing. He's still making progress. And ultimately, we, the Western European countries and Canada, are in the position politically to decide to rearm ourselves. And that won't happen overnight. But I could come back to that later because of our experience in Second World War. But certainly the decision to have the willing engage in it. I mean, each one of our respective government have made strong statement to that effect, and this will have an impact upon Putin and Russia, the United States. That there is a willingness. Certainly, Germany came out strong. France has came out strong. Britain and Canada, and I don't know about Italy, some of the others. So we're all are already engaged. We haven't sail yet. We haven't organized our troops, but the political will is there. And I think there is also political support within our own respective society, certainly in Canada, as we're going through a federal election at the moment. There's no argument on the part of any of the political parties running that Canada will play its part and Canada will get ready for it and Canada will rearm, which is a good thing.
Well, I would add just to what have been said already that, well, nothing changed from the Russian side. And uh, I would agree also with my Ukrainian colleagues who unanimously evaluate the situation as that the war won't stop despite all the efforts and this so-called negotiation process or ceasefire process. Because Russia is not interested in it, and Russia is the main actor who is waging this war. And while Russia keeps interest in this war and continuation of this war will continue despite everything or any kind of concessions that Ukraine can agree to. That's the first point. Yeah, Russia, well, the objectives that and then the interest that Russia perceives through this negotiation, first and foremost, are about returning of Russian Black Sea Fleet to Crimean ports and renewal of the famous and failed project of grain corridor, which actually Ukraine managed to secure itself by pushing Russian fleet out of the uh, western part of Black Sea. So Russia wants to come back. And this is the main, probably, and the most important Russian objective through this, I would say, so-called negotiations, because in the negotiations, for negotiations or endless negotiations in which Russia is quite a famous player, remembering Russian negotiation tactics with Georgia and Moldova and all these so-called peace processes in these frozen conflicts in these countries. So this is my second point about, but we obviously what has changed is that security. Yeah, there are security architecture in Europe that is can well there are just talks right now about it. The declarations of Trump's administration, they challenge that, not just challenge and undermine the security, the transatlantic security architecture, but they undermine awareness and confidence of partners in the reliability of this architecture. And they undermine the awareness that or what can happen or if like allies will support or will defend each other if or when Russia will attack, for example, any of the Baltic states or Poland. And there are talks, again, there are just talks right now that, Europeans at least expect the military aggression, Russian military aggression in maybe even this year, but in 2 years, 2 or 3 years. So it's, and what NATO will do. Will NATO be capable to prove its reliability, and its ability to secure your transatlantic security, this security architecture. And what has dramatically changed is also everyone speaks that liberal order is dead, liberal international order is dead. Maybe it is still safe in Europe, like international order, but generally, human rights are not supported by major countries in the world as a universal practice, as universal values. So everything is being changing in transition. And in this period of transition, Europe and Canada and those democratic, still liberal democratic states have to find their place, their new place, and have to find their new place also in cooperation with so-called global south, which is watching this process of transition and demanding its new place in the new world and new global architecture. And the last, what I wanted to say here is what has really dramatically changed is that the biggest the biggest democratic state, still democratic and hopefully democratic in future, the United States of America, does not support the principle of territorial integrity anymore. And this is maybe the main challenge, because what this will be the main challenge for, this is already the main challenge for United States allies. I'm not speaking about the whole world and even about Ukraine, but nobody speaks about this tiny country of Bhutan, which is being slowly consumed, territories which are being slowly consumed right now by China, and nobody speaks about it. So territorial integrity of European states are under the question mark right now, and this is probably the big challenge for Canada also, and for, speaking about Arctic, and for European allies of the United States. And here I stop.
And I would add to this, that this question mark, this fundamental question mark that you raised, hinges upon one man, of Donald Trump's interpretation of what are the new U.S. security interests. He's redefining this and pushing a reorientation of U.S. foreign policy like we haven't seen for decades, alone with a small group, a handful of people, and transforming the Republican Party. Given his chaotic, improvised, sometimes destabilizing way of operating, we don't know exactly how he would react. So NATO's credibility hinges upon Article 5 and U.S. commitments towards European security. We don't know exactly what are now the U.S. interpretation of their own national security interests towards Europe. We don't know how also the United States will react if there's no ceasefire, if there's no peace achieved in Ukraine. Several options must be considered here. The U.S. could say, President Trump could say, I've done everything I could. I failed. Well, I didn't fail. He would never say he failed. The Russians or the Ukrainians don't want peace, so he's withdrawing support from Ukraine. He's withdrawing partially from European security, and he could say to Europeans, "Take care of this. It's not a U.S. concern anymore." Or on the other way around, the opposite hypothesis is still an option. He could feel personally attacked by this because he pledged towards this 24-hour peace deal he could achieve to get his Nobel Prize, and because he's so envious of President Obama's Nobel Peace Prize. And trying to achieve this, he could force significant additional sanctions on Russia, perhaps arm Ukraine more than what it has received, and push or force Russian compliance to a ceasefire, a full-blown ceasefire. Given that these two options are not completely impossible, how can Europeans take on their security if they don't know exactly how the US will commit to such a fundamental issue of the future of European security? I find it completely astonishing that we don't know exactly which way it could go. And you see this in the reaction of those European countries that are pushing for a reassurance force to be deployed in Ukraine post ceasefire. First of all, it's a handful of countries, with France and the UK leading it, but still some are pushing for a US backing support of this force, still not realizing that this support may not be provided by the United States, and thus having to develop a plan to operate alone, autonomously from the United States military. And I haven't seen such a plan, because the numbers of the amount of troops that Europeans would be willing, or Canadians would be willing to deploy to Ukraine after ceasefire, this number keeps reducing as these negotiations in Paris and elsewhere are ongoing. It used to be a couple of thousands of the 30,000 soldiers was a number mentioned by the British, but now we're talking about perhaps just Air Force commitments with just token forces deployed on the ground in Ukraine, and training perhaps being undertaken by this force rather than really a force that could be deterring, if not engaging, with a possible Russian violation of such a ceasefire. All of these plans are hard to make if you don't know how the US will commit to this fundamental issue of the future of European security, and hence of European security.
This is certainly true. At the same time, the United States didn't stay or never stated that they would plan to withdraw from NATO support. That's still the case, and the situation is still evolving. And we saw in the first weeks of the talks, of the negotiations, that initially Russia seemed to be the winner in the situation. But this is also slowly changing, and we see this reflected in the statements of Trump himself, but also President Trump, but also his members of his administration that are critical messages towards Russia. There is also seems to be a change in U.S. negotiation team that might have started this process with constrained capacities and detailed knowledge on the negotiation process, and also on the context between two countries, between Russia and Ukraine, and that is also increasing now. And so we see a shift in this as well. There is certainly the element of unknown and unpredictability from the U.S. administration, but also from the part of Europe. The discussions that have been started on a coalition of the willing, and their clear direction that they're heading towards the deterrence force as opposed to the peacekeeping forces. I think it's also good to important to make a distinction between those two. The deterrence force is really to support one of the sides of the war, and that's Ukraine in this case. In case any agreement like the ceasefire or war termination will not be upheld by Russia, while peacekeeping is usually an additional force to element of monitoring and verification, and has mandate, in fact, to react to both sides of the conflict in case of violation of a ceasefire. Also, in terms of what we've seen in terms of international rule-based order, the role of the global South countries is becoming more prominent. We see also within the existing institutions like the United Nations that countries that are can be called middle powers, so like countries like South Africa or Latin America or Southeast Asia, they are becoming more vocal towards upholding the principles of international law, especially when it comes to territorial sovereignty, but also when it comes to how to say this institution should remain the platform for resolution of any wars and conflicts. But we also see that UN, OCC, and other institutions that were convened, created to lead to a solution of wars and conflicts, they struggle to provide a comprehensive solution in this situation as well.
I tend to look at what has transpired over the past couple of weeks as something positive. Um, all European allies are speaking the same language and the same determination, the same commitment. And they're sending a clear signal to both Russia and the United States that they won't be pushed aside. They want to be part of any settlement. If and when there is a settlement, they not only want to be a part, they want to deploy peacekeeping forces in Ukraine in order, in fact, to prevent any future attempt by Russia, in fact, to recommence hostility, which is a good thing. And our own Minister of Defense have said Canada will also contribute troops. Now, the difficulty from those three countries, they don't have the capacity because they didn't need to over the past 40 years with the NATO to develop the intelligence and the logistic support of a multinational force outside their own territories. So that's going to be a major problem. And I'm absolutely convinced that United States will not deploy troops, will not agree in having its NATO allies should deploy troops. But obviously, France and Britain and Canada have clearly made a point very, very strongly that they want to deploy because they know if they don't, it's only a matter of time before Russia will recommence hostility and will push, and then maybe Poland and some other countries will be next. But can this be done? Let me just give you a sort of an example. Canada, as a minor partner at the beginning of the First World War, did. War was declared in September 1939. That's when Parliament in Canada declared war. By December 1939, 3 short months after, Canada mobilized and shipped an entire division, 25,000 people, who landed in Britain. Now, they weren't trained, they weren't equipped, they didn't have all the wherewithal, but certainly Canada was a war footing. And France and Germany and Britain and Italy can do the same if needs come. But at the moment, their own respective forces and Canadian forces are there to develop the homeland. Well, none of our forces was developed to go and fight in Ukraine, so there'd be a requirement to do that. But the signals strategically were sent to Ukraine if and when peace comes in, if it comes in, those three countries at the very least will want to deploy force in a peacekeeping status. And that would be a problem. Are they NATO? Are they peacekeeping? Are they under the UN flag? But strategically, it's a good decision for the future, an absolutely good decision. And I hope, in fact, more countries will develop the political capacity to send troops also. If we do that, then maybe there's a way to block any future attempt by Russia in our lifetime to continue to invade and to prosecute their military aims.
I would just add that about international order and the growing role of international institutions. The thing is that the irony here is that Russia is this is the one of the most important Russian international strategic narrative that UN has to uh, have a leading role in all international processes, and that international order has to be based on the UN basis, and etc., etc., etc. So yeah, and then they also take a leading role in the process, or in their, at least in the discussions of transformation of the United Nations, inviting and declaring that Russia will and is already like defending interests of the global South countries, and particularly African countries, discussing the transformation of Security Council, of UN Security Council, and providing some African countries with the position in the Security Council. So Russia here takes the lead. Where the role of European Union and the rest of democratic world, it's the question for me. The second, and yes, international order is there. The problem is that it is not liberal anymore. The international order can be as well authoritarian, and it can be geographically, it can reflect the geographical vision of a division of the world between the global powers, which Russia also declares as a goal, as its strategic goal. And China supports it. And sometimes from Trump's rhetoric, it looks like that the United States administration supports this too, and is already drawing the lines on the map where the strategic sphere, geographical strategic sphere of geographical sphere of the United States interests lays. And it literally includes Greenland, yeah, Canada, maybe speaking about Northwest Hemisphere, but part of Northwest Hemisphere. So, and Arctic definitely. So I am quite pessimistic about capabilities and abilities even of the European Union to develop any kind of solid response to the threats that it faces right now, taking into account that that the European Union actually and the whole world had, the whole democratic world had not just 4 years of full-scale Russian aggression, but already 11 years of Russian aggression and annexation since annexation of Crimea, legal annexation of Crimea. So why would they suddenly be ready in 1 year or 2 years to deter Russian aggression, and maybe not just Russian aggression, but Russian-Chinese aggression, taking into account that Chinese soldiers were found, on the battlefield in Ukraine, and are captured right now and are war prisoners. So this I have more questions than answers in this situation right now. And here, speaking about Canada and collaboration between Europe and Canada, while these countries are still preserving, or at least declare that they follow the democratic and liberal values, I would say that their main interest is really to unite efforts and to increase their defense capabilities and military capabilities, and to prepare the societies for the real war, but not for some for the strategy like, let's wait while all Ukrainians die and stop this Russia. Maybe Russians will exhaust in Ukraine, and then we will have more time to prepare ourselves for the next future challenges. The future for the challenges in future. I mean, there is no time already, and probably allies will deploy their forces on the ground when other countries will be attacked, but we don't see it in Ukraine. We don't see even willingness to protect Ukrainian sky, and we don't see capabilities still. And I just wonder, why would we see it if some Baltic states would be attacked? I mean, I don't have answers. Maybe yes, maybe no, but this is the real problem, that we do not have answers, and still I see this inertia in the among European elites to pretend that everything um, can be settled by the means, but nothing must be changed radically, but the radical changes must be taken on the ground already.
What I think feeds into this perception or decision is the differing perception of in how far the degree of an extent of Russia as being seen as immediate threat by different European countries. And in Eastern Central Europe and Baltic states, that is obviously is perceived as a much imminent threat. And in some countries of Nordic or West Europe, it is not. And what also influences this perception is the disinformation of foreign interference and malign influence of state actors, so Russia, over the years. This is the FIMI influence is usually not visible directly, and it has a really long-term span that forms that works through basic narratives and understanding of the world, and that's also a real threat. I think also not only for Europe but also for different countries, for Canada as well. But the perception of threat, and is Russia prepared to escalate? Again, returning to the discussion on the coalition of the willing, what would be the escalation mechanism of the coalition of the willing in case Russia would violate a potential ceasefire agreement? That's, I think, a basic question that lays at the core of decision making of the European allies of Ukraine at the moment.
That's it. So deterrence only works if it's a credible commitment. And for it to be a credible commitment, there would be a need for perception on the part of Moscow that European countries willing to send troops in Ukraine to secure a potential ceasefire are willing to use military force against Russian assets in Ukraine, willing to shoot down drones, missiles, Air Force fighters, soldiers, willing to engage directly the Russian military in Ukraine, and perhaps even on Russian border towards Ukraine. I do not think that in Moscow there is that this commitment from European allies, whether from France or from the British and the Germans, is that credible because of the issues that my colleague just mentioned. The rearm program is a wish list of a potential $800 billion over 5 years if nations are willing to increase their debt. And that is not a given at all. And even if it were to be fully implemented and they were capable of spending so much money in only 5 years, which is also doubtful, those capabilities would not be useful right now today to secure a potential ceasefire today or this year in 2025. So to what extent are Europeans and Canadians, because Canada is also committed to, at least the current government, to support such coalition willing, to what extent are these participants willing to use military force against the Russian military directly without U.S. support? That's the fundamental key. I still think that the credibility of NATO, of those allies that are part of NATO, so outside of Ukraine, so the Baltic states we're mentioning, I still think that the credibility of Article 5 is secure, given that the U.S., even under Trump, has said that there was no desire to withdraw, at least from the nuclear umbrella that is provided to NATO allies, and there are still U.S. forces in Poland and elsewhere. I think that shows the credibility of that commitment. But I do not think that without a membership in NATO for Ukraine, that it is possible to have a credible deterrence force in Ukraine unless something major changes in the size of the forces and the type of forces that are deployed to Ukraine are not token forces to train and support and provide ISR, but are actually significant capabilities, including fifth generation air forces, air force aircrafts that could be deployed with the most technologically advanced weapon systems to deter and potentially engage if there's violation of that commitment. So again, if I go back to Canada to refocus this on these countries, I do not see Canada's military forces capable of engaging today Russia in Ukraine. We have a hard time sustaining our own battle group in Latvia with capabilities that the regular forces in Canada do not have. And we can't replenish this and sustain it if there's attrition. The Air Force, enough serviceable CF-18s to deploy a major commitment to Europe. Given that, if Canada was engaged in direct hostilities with Russia, Canada's territory would be at stake as well vis-a-vis Russia. There would still need to be deterrence in the Arctic, in the air, against potential encroachments in at least in the air and maritime space over the Canadian Arctic. So we would need to concentrate some forces there, with the question mark of would the U.S. support us through NORAD in that event. So to what extent do we have additional excess capabilities to deploy to Europe? I do not see this with the current Canadian Armed Forces. In 10 years, if the current recapitalization process is actually implemented, maybe, but in the foreseeable future, I have a significant doubts over Canada's capability.
Well, I come from a different point of view. And the point of view is, at the moment, certainly the Canadian forces and many of our NATO allies are not up to par. We recognize that. But I think there's a moment of reckoning that has occurred. It's called Trump. And Trump alliance, if I can use that word, with Putin is not only damaging, it's bloody dangerous. I think most countries, I was listening to President Macron address the nation a couple of weeks ago, and his intention, in fact, to what to do, and Germany and what the UE has now decided to raise in terms of funds. Ultimately, we've got to give him some time. Whether it's going to take a year or two or three or four to rearm and reinforce, and that includes Canada, certainly our armed forces will look very much different in a year or two and more adept in taking on the role in Ukraine. Of that, I'm convinced. Otherwise, we're doomed to fail, and we're doomed to have more Ukraine, or maybe I should say even less Ukraine. So I think NATO countries individually and collectively will up their game, if only because the US will no longer be there as a protector, no longer be there to provide the type of support that the European need to repel and to stop this presence by Russia, and it can only get worse unless we get on with it. So it's only a matter of time, but it's going to take time. But I think the will is there politically at the national and international level. So we should look at it with our not at what the situation is now, but what is likely to be in 3 or 4 or 5 years. As I said before, Second World War was a good case in point. When the signal was given, when war was declared, I mean, it was just absolutely amazing. Canada, at the end of the war, came up with the fourth largest navy. I mean, of a small country. It built tanks and airplanes, and we had 1 million people in uniform of a population of 11 millions. If and when Germany, which has the industrial might and the capacity and the will to do this, and they voted, and they have a political, it seems, accord to be spending and to multiply their defense budget, if we do this, I think at the political level and strategic levels, that's a message that we're sending to Russia. If you want to fight, we're going to fight. We don't want to, but we're going to fight. And first step is we're going to be putting a flag on on the Ukraine soil, if and when peace comes, and it may not come, but if it comes, we want to have forces in place, not as peacekeeping, because peacekeeping, just as the word says, they don't engage into combat. They're there with white flags. I think it would be more of an aggressive type, combat-orientated force that we'll need to have. But we are at the infancy level, at the political level. We're going to wait until Trump either gets sick or gets out of the way so that we can speak among allies to see what we're going to do and how quickly we can do it. But of this, I'm confident, at least from Canada perspective, we will increase our defense budget, increase our forces, and acquire equipment that we really need to have.
Thank you. We're just wrapping up the end of the conversation. So Olena, Julia, take it away.
Yeah, I want to make a short comment on Article 5 of NATO. Yes, well, states can apply Article 5, but I would like to quote it. It's like it's outlining that NATO should take such action as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force to restore and maintain the security of North Atlantic area. So what kind of necessity, level of necessity will be identified by each ally itself? And it's the question, will it be just we are really sorry about what's happening with you, or will it be a kind of boots on the ground? Yeah, so it's but it still be the Article 5. It's the problem that it is not clear at all what measures will be taken. So everyone will decide by himself or herself. And yeah, about the US, yeah, it looks like the biggest problem today for the North Atlantic, for the Euro-Atlantic or transatlantic security, and for Europe and for Canada is the presence of Trump in the White House. If Trump goes, there is kind of a possibility that everything will normalize again, and the liberal community, the liberal democratic community, will become again strong and defend it. But we don't know. I mean, we don't know if the U.S. policy will change even if Trump goes, because or if the U.S. will be capable in 5 or 7 or 10 years to defend even itself or its European allies or Canada, taking into account that military and technological and offensive capabilities of China are growing, and China is considered as the main rivalry of the United States, and China is together with Russia. I wouldn't forget Russia in this case, and yeah, it's obvious to me that Trump considers, like, he clearly identified the set of his prior interests. It's the deterrence of China, it's not Russia, the winning of competition, technological competition with China, or at least to keep preservation of the technological leadership of the United States. It includes also the rare materials, obtaining of rare materials necessary for production of high technological tools. And it's about Arctic also. So he doesn't care right now about European defense or European unity or prosperity and wellness and security of European Union. They simply do not care about it. So, and they do not care about, they think that Russia is still some kind of small issue. But so maybe there is a chance to bring everything back or to fix everything by, first of all, changing for Canada and European Union, because Canada is not ready to provide its own security. Even in the Arctic, speaking about Arctic, comparing military capabilities, offensive capabilities of Russia, China, and Canada, it's the question if Canada can defend its Arctic zone by itself. So not relying on the United States. But here, I think the Canada is in a better position than Europe, because United States are clearly more interested in preserving security of Arctic from the offensive of Russia and China. So, but yeah, it's the question it's still the task for Europe and for Canada to increase its defense capabilities and to change their perception of defense in the society, because the societies are not ready. People, you're absolutely right. People in European countries and in Canada are not ready to fight if they are attacked. I mean, maybe if the bombs will fall on their heads, but will they ready to fight for their allies? This is the question, because declaration of readiness, it's not the same that actions on the ground.
Yeah, to sum up, perhaps my assessment is that we are now in a transformative time when the existing structures are not no longer effective, and new ones need to be or modified, or new kind of unconventional methods are needed to come to a just and sustainable end of this war. NATO was developed as a deterrence force. It was not meant as a fighting combat-ready force. And I think now the NATO members have identified gaps based on their on the Russian war in Ukraine in their own combat readiness, and are discussing what can be done to fix those gaps. But there is a barrier to step over in order, and I agree fully in a situation when a country prepares for war, especially with a level of knowledge, financial, military means, as Canada had during the Second World War, or the European countries have now. A lot is possible in terms of ramping up defense production, but it is only possible if if there is a formal declaration of at least preparedness of war, and that's something very difficult message to sell to the societies in these countries. And the last point on the different timelines, Russia and Ukraine are, Russia's perspective, at least, a war of attrition, waiting who will fall first. But also in Russia, there's economic impact of the war is becoming more and more visible, making it unlikely, or at least less attractive, for Russia to continue active warfare on a long term. And United States seem to be more interested, at least at this term, to not to come to an end of war, a comprehensive end of war, but rather to a termination of hostilities without following on the consequences. And that's something also, a baggage that will and a bill that will have to be paid, or not have to be paid, but will be presented to the European neighbors to take responsibility for. So these are all aspects to take into account, and we did not touch upon the raw materials deal that is now presented. And another aspect of kind of economic for Ukraine, it's very important to preserve its economic independence in this situation, but lots to discuss perhaps for next time.
Yes, of course. There's so much to say here, and I want to thank you all so much for providing your expertise in this space on Canada, on Europe, and Ukraine. And thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this pod. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter, and be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platform so that you never miss an update. For more in-depth analysis and updates on national security and defense, be sure to visit our website at www.cdainstitute.ca, where you can find articles, reports, and more. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll be tuning in next time.